Andy McCarthy joins us once again, contributing editor at National Review, Fox News contributor and former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney. Andy, welcome back to the show. Always a pleasure to have you here.
Andy, great to be with you.
Thank you. The first question that I want to ask you, I want to get to the laptop conversation here in a second, but I think it was Trey Gowdy on Fox I heard several times suggest that the fraudulent government form that Hunter Biden filled out saying that he was not using drugs or addicted to drugs, that this isn't exactly a charge that is heavily pursued in our justice system. And I was wondering, Andy, in your expertise, do you feel like Hunter Biden is being put in court for this because his last name is Biden, maybe even unfairly so?
Yeah, I don't agree with Trey on that, and I'm not telling you anything I haven't told him. I think there's a category of cases in the gun field that we refer to in federal prosecution as lie and try. Those are cases where somebody who is an ineligible person under the statute, say a narcotics addict, a prior felon, there are various people who are under protective orders, that kind of stuff. There are about 8 or 9 categories in federal law of people who are ineligible. Sometimes what happens is, and this is not infrequent, they will lie on the form, but the lie is discovered before they get the gun. So even though they've technically violated the statute, those cases often don't get prosecuted because the person never gets the gun. Now, I must tell you, I think those people should get prosecuted, and I also think that it's precious to hear Democrats complain about it when was it 2021 or 2022, Joe Biden bragged about signing a law that increased the penalty for doing that to 15 years from 10 years. So they obviously thought it was pretty significant. But my point here is the category of lie and try is not Hunter's case. Hunter not only lied, he got the gun, and then he handled it recklessly in a manner, by the way, Annie, which is exactly why the law prohibits narcotics addicts from getting guns. It was handled irresponsibly. It was lost. It was they tried to discard it. I guess Haley Biden tried to discard it next to a school, which could have been catastrophic. And I understand that the bag that it was in had like cocaine residue in it. So on those facts where the person gets the gun and handles it recklessly, that case gets prosecuted 10 times out of 10. It's not a lie and try case. It's a lie and succeed case where, the guy then goes on to handle the gun in a very irresponsible way.
Man, that's a really good explanation of the difference here. And, Andy, listening to you explain from start to finish why this law exists and why we need to make sure that, there's a gun control, there's a big, theoretical conversation that we could have about gun policy and so on and so forth. But it's interesting to me to listen to, here's why the law exists. Here's why it's bad if someone breaks it. Here is what could happen if somebody, what's the worst thing that could happen in this scenario? And you've kind of laid it out for us. I compare that to Donald Trump's case and the Alvin Bragg trial. And we were kind of joking on Friday, like if Donald Trump, a good thing that they found him guilty so he couldn't do this to the people again. I don't know that Donald Trump would know how to recommit the crime that he was found guilty of 34 times.
Yeah.
And the comparison is pretty wild. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a great point. And it's like two different sides of the world, right? On the one hand, you have the Hunter Biden case, which involves laws that are unquestionably laws, that everybody knows what's in the content of the laws, and where the penalties in the laws have been increased because Democrats keep telling us we need these gun laws to restrict firearms rights. And I would add on that count, not only is the possession statute that Hunter's being prosecuted under, not only was that penalty increased under President Biden, when Biden was running the Senate Judiciary Committee, they increased to 10 years from 5 years the penalty for lying on the federal form, because Senator Biden said that federal form was very important to the regime of firearms regulation that they were implementing. So, we all know what these laws say. the crime, the conduct that's prescribed is very clear, and we have a pattern of increasing the potential penalties because Democrats again and again tell us how serious these things are. Contrast that with Trump, where even in New York, where the case took place, if you asked any 20 people in Manhattan on the streets what it was that Trump was convicted of, they couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
Because it's such a vaporous crime. It was basically bespoke. It was manufactured for the occasion, and ironically, it was manufactured by a notoriously progressive New York prosecutor whose default position with respect to serious crime is either to plead it down from felonies to misdemeanors or not to prosecute it at all. And here we have a situation where instead they created a crime for Trump. They basically wouldn't put in the indictment exactly what it was that they were doing. And I think that was because they knew that Bragg had no authority to prosecute federal law, which is what he was trying to do with not only prosecute, but reinterpret the federal campaign laws. So they sort of nestled that charge under a couple of other things that they didn't mention in the indictment. And then they took, in essence, what they said was the business crime, the business records crime, which they said Trump committed, is ordinarily a misdemeanor in New York, which means the statute of limitations would have run in 2019. But they said he committed it in order to commit a second crime. That second crime that finally Bragg settled on was another misdemeanor, a conspiracy to violate New York election law by influencing a campaign through unlawful means. Now, we could spend a long time on how ridiculous that statute is, but my shorthand point right now is just that it's another misdemeanor, which also should have been time barred by 2019. But under Bragg's novel theory, if you smush together the two misdemeanors, you somehow get a felony that he can multiply by 34, meaning that Trump would be facing up to 136 years of imprisonment, and he gets the benefit of a 6-year statute of limitations. So there's a lot of hocus pocus involved.
We're speaking with Andy McCarthy. I mean, broadly speaking, Andy, have you ever seen anything like this before?
I don't think I'm singular in that regard, Andy. I don't think anybody's seen anything like this before. And I really don't think I'm the only person saying this. And, look, some people have tried to say, look, that's their bread and butter at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. They prosecute, white-collar business records crime all the time.
That's what Bragg said. Yeah.
Yeah, well, but what I would say about that is, to my knowledge, every other case that they've used the statute in, they always put in the indictment and charge the other crime that the person was supposedly trying to conceal. And in no case anywhere in the United States, not just in New York, but anywhere in the United States, has a state prosecutor asserted the right to enforce federal campaign finance law. So the claim that they do this kind of thing all the time is it's simply not true. It doesn't bear up in reality.
We're speaking with Andy McCarthy here, and I'm in no way, shape, or form any type of legal expert, and I'm so grateful to be connected with folks like you who are at the tops of that department. But I kind of want to ask you this question. You can answer it however you like. I mean, I know how all of this makes me feel, but I'm just listening to experts tell me their opinions and, putting them together and coming up with my own. You understand law. You've practiced law at a very, very high level. How does the fact that this was, A, allowed to occur in the beginning, and B, concluding in a 34-count conviction, how does that make you feel as somebody who has been a student and a practitioner of American law?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and it's one I've talked to at length with people who do what I do or did for a living, including people who came up as I did, kind of grew up in the Justice Department and in federal prosecutions. And a lot of those people, Annie, I have to tell you, they are not Trump fans in the slightest. This isn't like at all about Trump. But I think in our conversations, there's been a kind of they know not what they do tenor to these discussions, because it's really not about Trump. It's about the notion that if prosecutors can do this, and the thought that, Trump is some kind of sui generis figure, and they'll only ever do this to Trump. And all legal precedents that get derived by this kind of stuff are going to be exclusively confined to Trump, such that they won't be applied to anyone else, and we don't have to worry about all this stuff, is nonsense.
Yeah.
The problem here is if they could do this to Trump, they can do it to anyone. And this is not like playing with some, abstruse set of regulations or some boutique body of law. This is our entire criminal justice system. And to have a free society and a prosperous society, you have to have the rule of law. To have the rule of law in a way that's enduring, you have to have people believe that everybody gets a fair shake in the legal system and that everybody gets treated reasonably equally. I mean, obviously, equal justice under the law is our constitutional ideal, and we fall short of it from time to time, a lot more often today than we used to. But what keeps the society peaceful and stops people from taking the law into their own hands, such that we would have the law of the jungle, is that people accept that our rule of law, our court system, our prosecutorial systems, overseen by independent judges, that's all legitimate, and that the outcomes in that system are legitimate. And if we start to think that it's rigged, then people aren't going to have confidence in it anymore. It's not going to be legitimate, and the society starts to break down.
Yeah. I mean, the impacts are incredible, and I think that's the way a lot of folks are feeling right now. I know we have you for a limited time, so one last question. Watching as closing arguments are being made in the Hunter Biden trial right now, we also know that he will be facing what I understand to be maybe more significant charges in September in court because of the tax evasion problems. Donald Trump might be getting jail time. I don't think that we should be ruling that out at all. We've gotten this far. Why wouldn't they go one step further? What do you think is going to happen between these two? Exonerated for Hunter Biden in this trial? What kind of consequences? Let us know what you think.
Well, I think with respect to Trump, the likelihood is what you say, is that he'll get a prison sentence. Now, I want to be clear. That doesn't mean that I think he's going to end up in prison. But I do think that, I think he'll be continued on the conditions of his release through his appeal, which will take another year to process. But I also think that because Judge Merchan, who has shown himself to be quite serviceable to New York progressives, because he knows that by issuing a prison sentence, that doesn't mean that Trump will actually end up in prison, certainly not anytime soon. I think that's more incentive to Merchan to impose a prison sentence, because he knows that he's not going to be really accountable for it. It's not like, he's going to impose the sentence and somebody's going to cart Trump and the Secret Service off to Rikers Island.
So in that instance, he sentences him to prison, and then for the rest of the campaign season, Donald Trump is going to prison, and then he's appealed, and whatever happens, happens. But you get a little more politics.
But they get out of it. They get out of it what the objective here was, which is that they want Biden to be able to call him a convicted felon from now until Election Day. And that bell can't be unrung. That's going to be the case. And it might cost Trump the election. I know a lot of people who are pro-Trump people are very fired up about this, as they should be. But, there's internal polling in places that shows that, like, a lot of people don't tune into elections until the end. And being labeled a convicted felon again and again and again in negative messaging could cost Trump a point or two, and that could be the difference in a close election between winning and losing. I think with Hunter, my expectation is, and I think this is probably why he decided not to testify, because that would have run higher risk of a potential prison sentence. I looked at his sentencing guidelines last week. I don't think he's likely to get a prison sentence for the trial that's ongoing now. I think he'll be convicted, but I don't think it's a prison sentence, and that's why I don't put any stock in Joe Biden's claim last week that he's not going to pardon his son. I think that's about as enforceable as his claim that he couldn't do anything about the border because Congress hadn't given him the legislation. He won't pardon his son as long as his son doesn't have to go to prison anytime soon. And I don't think even in the tax case, I think the tax case goes in September. It's going to take several weeks to try. he wouldn't be sentenced until after the election, even if he gets convicted. So I don't think there's any prospect that he's going into prison between now and November. And I don't think any commitment by President Biden not to pardon his son is going to be enforceable after Election Day.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And if there's one thing we've heard about Joe Biden across the board, that he's a very loving father. So I don't think anybody would be shocked to find out that he would do that. Interesting insight. And Andy McCarthy, you were in incredible demand, and we are grateful that you had some time for us here on our show today. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Annie.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Andy McCarthy is a contributing editor at National Review, a Fox News contributor, and one of the great legal minds